Welcome to For the Purpose Of, the podcast where we navigate the intersection of technology and the world of education. I'm Keith Tramper.
And I'm Sarah Wood.
And I'm Katherine Fredrickson. Today is the third installment in our series centered on AI in education. We've been deep in the AI waters this year, and we created this series to share some of the key things educators should know about AI. So today we'll be talking about zooming in on some of the limitations of AI systems and what AI can or can't do. Things like fabrications, whether AI systems can present false information as truth, and deepfakes and disinformation. Those are things that deal with AI systems that can make the creation of disinformation much, much easier.
So we always like to start off with a fun question. So we're going to play a little game of Who Said It, where each of us will take a quote and then the others will have to try and guess who that quote is from. So we are going to start off with Keith.
Okay, so my quote is, "The best way to prepare for the future is to challenge the present." And I'm going to give you a hint because I think there's a category of people that this person falls into. And they are a famous computer scientist.
Grace Hopper.
Dang, you got it.
Did I really?
First shot. Wow.
Good job.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I'm so good at these games. Wow.
We're on fire today.
Awesome. Yep, that's Grace Hopper, one of
Very
the
good.
founders of computer science as we know it today. Pretty
Go
incredible
Grace.
person.
Woo woo.
All right, I have one. And this one is, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor.
Ooh.
It sounds like a Star Wars quote.
I'm going to go with Steve Jobs.
No?
Not Steve Jobs.
Muhammad Ali.
No,
That's a good guess.
not
Gandhi.
quite.
That's going to be
Nope.
my guess for everything.
Even when the odds are not in your favor, that makes me think of Hunger Games, right?
Yes.
Is this Katniss?
Effie. No, it's not.
We're actually watching
Dang.
Hunger Games right now.
That's a good one. All
I
right,
don't
you
know.
ready
I give
to
up. Yeah, what is
reveal?
it?
Elon Musk.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll round us out here. Mine is a quote by someone who was then quoted by someone else. So you might know the original or the second time around quote. Be curious, not judgmental.
I think that was Albert Einstein, wasn't it? No?
Nope.
Dang. I'm not
Is
good
it
at
a
this
Nobel
game.
Peace? Is it a Nobel Peace Prize winner?
I want to say yes. I have to look it up.
Ask the Googles. Be curious, not judgmental.
Is this a woman?
No, he did not. Oh,
Oh,
nope. So I said it's a he. And no, he did not win a Nobel
okay.
Prize. It became more relevant, I would say, in the past couple of years through a TV show that became quite popular. And that TV show is on Apple TV. And has to do with a sport.
Ted Lasso?
Yes.
Ding, ding,
Yeah.
ding, ding. Ted Lasso said it, but it was a Walt Whitman original quote.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I seriously thought you were going to get that right away, Keith.
Yeah,
I debated
should've.
even putting it
should've.
in there. Being the Lasso fan that you are.
I think I threw myself off like digging through thousands of quotes on the internet to come up with my favorite quote here. So
I can't say it's my favorite, but it just kind of stuck out to me.
yeah, that's a good one.
I like it. It is.
All right, well, let's get into our topic today. As Katherine said, we're going to sort of dive into those limitations of AI, or I guess you could call it the ethics of AI. And as we get into this work, it can take us a lot of different directions. So we're going to kind of choose a couple of different topics each time that we revisit AI ethics on the podcast, just to dive a little deeper into. And a lot of this work is inspired by Leon Furs. If you haven't heard of him, go check him out. He does a lot of work on the AI ethics side of things. But today, we're focused on fabrications, deepfakes, and disinformation. And we'll start out with fabrications. You might have heard this called hallucinations. I am seeing this more often called fabrications lately, so I'm changing my vocabulary here. But essentially, the idea here is that AI is designed to give you an answer. If you ask it a question, it's going to give you something, but it might make something up in order to give you an answer. So it might present you with false information and present it as true. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about fabrications. I think it's important to know that this will get better over time, and humans, us, the users of AI, are the ones that are going to influence that. And I think it further pushes on that idea of the 80-20 rule, which we've mentioned on the podcast before, of letting AI do 80% of the work, and you as the human need to review it and modify it for your context with that last 20%. So I think it's important that we always keep that rule in mind.
That is so true. And as we were kind of talking and planning about this, my brain went to the book Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI by Ethan Malik. And so I just recently finished that a couple weeks ago. And so I pulled it back out again. And I was trying to think what's like sticks out to me with like deepfakes or fabrications, disinformation. And it kind of kept on coming back to that those are some of the outcomes, and based on some of these other beliefs that people have or how these AI systems are created is where it's really kind of rooted, where that starts. And it made me think in the book that Ethan Malik talks about sentience a lot, and that AI is not, meaning sentience is kind of defined as the capacity of an individual, including humans and animals, which was interesting to me, to experience feelings and have cognitive abilities such as awareness and emotional reactions. And so I think that's where it kind of blends into that whole what we do with AI. Are we using it for good? Are we using it for some not so good kinds of things? And that AI doesn't have feelings or emotions. So if we ask it to do something, like he said, it will give us an answer. It will do it. It's getting better about picking up on things that aren't quite so good, but it doesn't necessarily know that that is inherently a bad thing to do. So it goes back to the training data that system was built on. And one of the quotes that really stood out to me, he said in the book that the public needs education on AI so they can pressure for an aligned future as informed citizens. And I think that really resonated with me because of a lot of the work that we are doing in regards to AI when we're talking with educators. And I think sometimes the gut instinct is like, yeah, I know ethics are involved. Yeah, I know there's bias. Yeah, I know this, but like, show me the tools. But it is so important to have that foundational knowledge of these things that are going around so that we can be an informed citizen, because yes, we're dealing in the moment, but what we do now is affecting the future.
Preach it, Sarah Wood.
Preach. I know. And so like that just really stuck with me. So like as I was thinking about this, like that needs to come first before even talking about the fabrications or formerly known as hallucinations or deepfakes or disinformation, so that even our students, yes, you could say like things are bad, but do they know why they're bad? And so that you're building that capacity within them to be critical thinkers, so that when they're presented with something, that curiosity spark to go like, is that a good thing? To like start having that internal dialogue and start questioning that. Because just because AI tells you something, it's not true. Like we used to joke back in the day, like, oh, it's on the internet, it's got to be true. It's still a go-to response sometimes. Oh, I saw it on the internet, it's got to be true. And so now it's turning into, oh, well, AI said it, so it's got to be true. But it's not always true, because AI will always give you an answer. And so I think it's just it's important to talk about that when you're talking about the fabrications and deepfakes and disinformation as that foundational level before actually even getting into what those things are, so that yes, they're bad to have those systems, those bias systems as far as training data and things like that, but then also holding yourself accountable for the future. What information are you feeding into AI? But also, if you come across something that AI has given you, and it, maybe it's in, something that's not so quality that, like anyone could have put this in, this could have been a child. What do you do with that information once you have it? How do you report that to those models that are giving that information back? Is there a way to do that? Not all models have a way to report that. So it just really takes me down, like he said, down that ethics rabbit hole that I feel like is kind of a foundational part before getting into the outcomes of those, poor ethics.
Thank you, Sarah. That's some great information there. A lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about too parallels a lot with what you were talking about. AI presents information based on patterns of data that it's been trained on, but there is no understanding or context to it. So unlike us, AI does not have awareness or comprehension of the meaning behind this information. And so I have some examples of how it works. So for example, with pattern recognition, it may generate sentences that look correct or provide answers that seem logical, but it doesn't really know what the words or concepts mean. And even with some statistical associations, for example, in some language models, if the word apple frequently appears near the word fruit in the training data, the AI will associate apple with fruit, but has no actual understanding of what an apple or fruit actually is. So, and one more in this category here, the lack of context. It might provide a fact-based answer to a medical question, but it may fail to consider the specific needs or nuances the individual is asking it. So there's really a lack of information. It lacks understanding and reasoning or awareness. So, and also errors in some of the training data. There's biases. We talked a lot about that. Skewed training data, and it results in biased recommendations and discriminatory job suggestions and medical treatments. So there's a lot of errors in that. Even some of the information may be outdated. So if the information's outdated, it may generate irrelevant and inaccurate information. So these might result in some laws that might no longer exist. And then it's like, oh, these are really old and dated, and they don't even have anything to do with today. So also, AI systems inherit many inaccuracies from their training data. So this offers a lot of limitations as potential issues. So for example, trend predictions. So if you're looking at some historical data, it may actually fail when future conditions differ significantly. I think of like weather or farmers' almanacs. I don't know. But even we talked about image recognition, high quality data sets. So AI can be trained on reliable data and it could produce text, but sometimes it's outdated and this information may still influence the information that's being outputted. So in summary, while AI can inherit accuracy from training data, it's still very limited by the quality and completeness of the data.
Yeah, I think you're really speaking to the fact that, yes, we have AI, and yes, it feels intelligent.
Right.
But really, behind the scenes, it's not as intelligent as we make it out to be. It can do incredible things, but it's still on us to understand how it all works so that we know what we're getting out is valid.
Exactly.
So definitely, again, going back to checking what the response is out of the AI system, and validating its response.
So I think that's so true what you shared there, Catherine, about those things that just goes into like building that foundational training data. And it's difficult because where we're at now is going off training data that has been used probably for quite a while already. So now, like, a lot of systems are starting to really look at how they're creating their training data and using it ethically. But then, kind of going into what Keith was saying too, it's like AI can do amazing things, but it's on the human to define like what you do with that. Who's in the driver's seat when it comes to that. And I think that leads us into what we talked about originally with like deepfakes and disinformation. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I know that sometimes these words get thrown around and, we think that they mean something, but really like when we talk about deepfakes, we're talking about a type of media that has been AI manipulated, could be an image, a video, an audio recording, to make it appear as that someone said or did something that they never actually did. Whereas disinformation is more of like deliberately spreading false information in order to influence others. And so I think they go hand in hand, because by creating deep fakes, you're spreading disinformation. But once again, it kind of brought me back to, the good old co-intelligence book with Ethan Malik. And he reiterates what we've been saying all along, and what Keith brought up again here is that, we need to be that human in the loop. And he says that we need to make sure that AI serves to help humans, not hurt them. And I think that's something that is really important, especially to reiterate with students, because I know in a lot of conversations that are taking place, especially at elementary level, because a lot of students can't use the same amount of AI tools that older students can just due to age restrictions. It's a lot of conversation around these things. How can we use AI for good? And, maybe sharing what a deep fake is. It made me think of when I was in the classroom and doing digital citizenship at the beginning of the year. I did a whole Shark Week themed digital citizenship unit, and I shared the Michael Phelps versus the shark video that Discovery Education had done a while ago. And like all of them believed it, because that was done at the time. Michael Phelps was like big, with swimming. I mean, obviously he's still, well accomplished. But they're like, how did that shark not attack him? And, going into these kinds of things. And so then it kind of goes into, it wasn't so much the conversation at that point of, is this AI? It could have been at that time, or is it CGI created kind of thing? But why would someone want to create that? And so what we kind of came to is, in our discussion about it, is it generated conversation. People were talking about it. They were talking about Michael Phelps. They were talking about sharks. They were talking about Discovery. So it was a great way to get people to look more into those kinds of things, which we kind of said was like a good use of that, because there was no physical harm that was done to anyone. It raised awareness on some of like the science behind the swimming that goes into it. I know I'm speaking Keith's language because he was a swimmer. It's so much more than what people see on TV when they see someone swimming. And I think when we hear deep fake or disinformation, we immediately go to the negative of, like there were deep fake videos that were created with like Tom Cruise and Barack Obama that were really kind of spread across the internet that weren't necessarily created with positive intent per se. So I think it's good to also look at really trying to spark conversation around these topics and see that it's not always a negative thing. And it kind of goes back to that human in the loop. What was the intent? What was, someone ethically trying to do when they were creating that? And a big theme that Ethan Malik talks about in his book, he states it at the beginning, but it resonates throughout the entire book, is that he has 4 rules for co-intelligence. And when he's talking about co-intelligence, he's talking about how we live with AI, how we live with this robot, this alien that, we're trying to learn about as it grows and evolves. And his first rule is that you always invite AI to the table. So if we're looking at creating, if we're looking at preparing our students for the future, how are we inviting AI to the table in that conversation as far as that creation process? Is it like the actual digital creation? Is it creating scripts, kinds of things? It might be great, it might be terrible, but you won't know until you try. His second one was being the human in the loop, which we talk a lot about. His third rule was treating AI like a person, but tell it what kind of person it is. And so I think this is really key as far as when we're talking about ethics, that human in the loop is determining what kind of person per se that AI is taking on. So if we want it to take on the persona of someone good, we need to tell it to be good. And his last rule is assume this is the worst AI you will ever use. And that's like kind of terrifying because looking at where we're at right now, we've even seen significant gains since 2022 when this conversation really kind of reignited when ChatGPT became public. And it's grown, and it's fascinating that it's still considered primitive. And we have a lot of growth that can happen in this area. So I just think it's like really things to consider as we're talking about these topics such as deepfakes and disinformation that have like inherently negative connotations, and it really comes back to that human in the loop every time, I feel like.
Yeah. I like that you used the word primitive there a minute ago. I think it's both important and I think sometimes baffling to think we're only at the beginning of what AI can do, right? If we're looking at the exponential curve of how this will take off, we're just starting that. So I expect to see it, continue to grow even faster as we move forward into the future. I just wanted to share a couple things. I listened to a podcast the other day called Pioneers of AI, which is really interesting. They kind of interview different people who are creating different things for AI, and they kind of pick it apart, how it works, and some of the ethical considerations that go with that. And the episode in particular I was looking at is called Inside the AI That's Cloning Icons Like Eminem, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, and Robin Wright. So in this, they kind of, if you've seen the movie Here, which is, I think, still in theaters, it essentially takes place in the same spot over time. So you see these characters go from really young to old. And you could say that was done with CGI, but it actually was using AI tools. And the person who created that AI tool was on this podcast talking about it. I guess the difference there is for directors, they can see in real time what it looks like before CGI ever really touches what they're seeing on camera. So kind of wild to think that. And they actually bring up the idea or the example of Eminem and his performance at the VMAs, where they had like a double on stage performing live with him. But through the live stream, you could actually see a de-aged Eminem acting as Slim Shady. So just super interesting to see how some of this is, being used. But I think there's also some kind of scary stuff that comes from that. And I don't want to focus too much on it, but I do want to make sure we know this is out there. Another movie, I watch a lot of movies, I guess. Another movie that kind of highlights one of the dangers of this is called Thelma, which came out this year too. And it's about essentially a grandma who receives a deep fake phone call from one of her grandchildren who's in trouble, right? So they mimic that grandchild's voice, and she ends up sending money to this person, right? And the story is kind of a dramedy, if you will, of her trying to chase down the people who took her money. It's, it's an interesting movie. It's kind of interesting to see how that can play out. I think one other place, and I won't go too into detail here, where deepfakes show up is in the adult film industry and using tools called undressing tools to take the clothes off of people. There was a big article in Time magazine around this topic, and I think it's something to be aware of as we're moving forward too. So I guess the question comes up is, how do we combat deepfakes so that we leverage them for things like creativity and art and not so much for the harm side of things? And I think as a global community, we're trying to reckon with that. And some are using video verification systems to just like imagine a watermark on a video that you actually created, just to verify that it's something you did and approved of. I don't know how far that will go, and I think our kids are going to be those that kind of navigate that future where we are living in a world of deepfakes.
I think that's where like the foundational piece comes back into the conversation, and really not just for our students, but also for us. I feel like we are also learning how to navigate this space of AI. but our students are looking to us for answers, and our children are asking questions at home about this. And so just the whole conversation about media literacy and AI literacy is more important than ever. And I know that like we plan out this podcast and we talk about things ahead of time, but then in the moment it's just kind of whatever comes out of our mouths, but it's a good way for us to process what we're thinking around a specific topic. And I don't know if everyone always has that same space to do that, or the same like-minded people who want to process like, what does deepfakes mean and what are the implications of it? And so even as adults, I feel like we need that media literacy.
And these questions will come up, whether you're in school or whether it's at home with your own children. And some of the things are like, well, how do we engage in these conversations around these deep fakes that are out there? And I think it's really important to be honest and really explain these things. Like some questions I think about is, what do you think deep fakes are? And how might they differ from other forms of media manipulation? Like, just think about us using Photoshop at the time and video editing, and how is this different? How is it similar? And then we get into the ethical implications again. Like, we talked about ethics and how is it unethical, but are there ways that we can use this ethically too? And we talked about the harm and misinformation that's been spread, but are there ways that we can use this for good, and being the good human in the loop? And just, looking at media being trustworthy, how trustworthy really is it? And can we trust news outlets and social media and personal videos when there are so many deep fakes out there? Actually, there was a video of a recently elected president from South Korea, and he used deep fakes in his campaign. And these were AI generated videos of him speaking that appeared 100% real. And his avatar was created using 20 hours of video. And this made him appear friendlier than usual, answering questions about his personality type and actually his favorite karaoke songs. So I guess my question at this point is, should politicians even be allowed to use deepfakes when running for office?
You're you're sort of speaking to like the good side of things and the bad side of things, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
unpack whether it's ethical to use deepfakes, right? And
Right.
in the case of the Korean politician, he used that to bolster his image, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't someone else claiming his identity and making him say something that was incendiary, right? It was more for his own gain.
Right.
So it's really interesting to think about that. And just on that same note, I want to put out there one of the organizations that I follow closely with media literacy is Namely, NAMLE. And we often talk about them when we talk about AI with different questions. They have I think it's called key questions. They have a document of a lot of those questions, like who benefits from this? Who paid for this? Who is harmed by this?
Mm-hmm.
Who is involved in building this thing? So it's a really great resource. I'll make sure it's linked in the show notes here.
Yeah, I often think about the legal and social consequences too. And should there be legal consequences for someone who creates and spreads deep fakes? It's one of those things that you were saying, Keith, like, does it benefit? Is there a problem with that? Well, possibly not. But is it encompassing the reality of who this person is? And is it true to the person's character? So I question that a lot. And our current law is enough to address the challenges that are happening now. I don't know. I also think about other questions like, what are some of the creative ways deepfakes can be used in movies, art, and education? So, like, trying to focus on the good, even in education with students, they could be used to embellish that creativity too with certain projects. Of course, if that's the parameters of the project, as we stated, there's students want to know what those types of parameters are in the classes that they are in, and what they should be allowed to use. And honestly, some questions I have are, in the next 5 to 10 years, how is this going to evolve? How is this going to change? And I guess, how is this going to impact us, like in society? So I don't know. How do we prepare for that?
Yeah.
You know, it's just so much to wrap our heads around at this moment.
Well, I think that's a lot for us to process and talk through. And so we are going to use this as an opportunity to take a little bit of a brain break. And we will cut over to a commercial and be back in a moment.
Hey there, listeners. Have you signed up for Podcast PDX yet? Sign up now to start earning sketches while you listen and reflect on this podcast. Head over to bit.ly/FTPO PDX to start today. This episode's Podcast PDX question is, what's your viewpoint on AI fabrications and or the proliferation of disinformation and deepfakes in our society? Submit your response for sketches today at bit.ly/FTPO PDX. All right, welcome back. We're going to jump into the mailbag segment. We had a question come in, kind of a fun one to think through and discuss. This question is from Elizabeth. If you could go back in time and have one modern device or software available to you during college, what would you choose?
I think this just dates us all. I mean,
Let's see how old they are.
I know. I'm like, do I say what I think and really put it out there?
I would have really loved a
Yes.
typewriter in my day.
Hey,
The
I
word
learned how to type
processor.
on a typewriter.
Yeah, I did
We had a-
too, actually. We had an old
you?
one.
Nice. I think what I would have to say, and I'm embarrassed to say this, like, would be some sort of learning management system. Because back in the day, like, we had our floppy disks and you did all your assignments in Word or Excel, PowerPoint, whatever, and you emailed them to your professor. And it wasn't until I was into grad school, like, when I really had that, and I was like, game changer. But like an undergrad, like, no, not it. Still have my floppy disks. That's embarrassing.
You still have them? How do you use them?
No, I think what I did is I transferred all the data to an external hard drive.
Wow.
What I'm going to do with that? Nothing. It still sits there, but
Yeah,
it's a
it
relic.
took up all of 1 meg on your
I know.
1 terabyte hard drive.
Put a couple papers on one floppy, but you know.
Katherine, what about you?
Well, I think back to the days of writing my essays and freaking out because I thought maybe they were accidentally deleted or I lost my whole paper. And so for me, I think the cloud storage would be a big one so that I wouldn't have to
yeah.
worry about the physical storage. That would have been a big game changer for sharing files and collaborating even with classmates. I don't know. I like the idea of even just having to share documents. It's kind of nice to have to edit stuff together and do group projects. But man, back then we did not have that, you know? So
Yep.
I think for me, that'd be a huge plus.
Yeah. Back then, working collaboratively on writing a paper looked like you and your partners sitting over each other's shoulders on one computer typing it, right?
Yeah.
But don't watch me type. Don't watch me type.
wait, I gotta delete, back up. And then I remember I actually had a friend that said, you know, you don't need to delete the whole sentence just to fix a word. I was like, what? Oh. And then I was just like, just click on it. You know? I don't know. It's just kind of funny.
Yep. Well, I think for me, in my undergrad, I wish I had this tool. I had it during my master's and it made such a difference, but it's called Notable. Have you guys heard of Notable? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've heard of it, yeah.
So it's an app for your iPad. And what it will do is like record the audio that's happening in the room. And then you take notes on like handwritten notes on the iPad. And what it will do is sync what was being said in the classroom along with your notes. So like if you're like me, I get distracted listening to the professor or distracted by something else, right? And I'm like, I just wrote down the word the. Like what were they saying at that point, you know? And you can just kind of click on it and go back and listen to what was said. And it made such a big difference for my understanding of the content. So I wish that was around in my undergrad. I feel like I would have done a little better in college that way. So what would your tool be? Let us know, and don't forget to register to be a part of the podcast PDX community at bit.ly/FTPO-PDX.
And that's it for this episode of For the Purpose of. Thanks for tuning in. And if you love this podcast, we'd love it if you share it with a friend.
Do you have a question? We'd love to hear it. Go to bit.ly/FTPO-mail to ask. You can reach out and find all things EdTech at bit.ly/IamEdTech. We'll catch you next time on For the Purpose of.
This podcast is a service of Kent ISD, produced by Keith Tramper, Sarah Wood, and Katherine Fredrickson. Edited by Keith Tramper. Original jingle music by Katherine Fredrickson. Our theme music is Neon Nights by Scott Holmes Music, and our ad music is Vienna Beat by Blue Dot Sessions.
Fun fact, that was my laser tag name back in the day, Slim Shady.
Really? Wow.
Go to laser tag name.
That's
Don't
awesome.
steal it.